Everybody go like that. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the City Council regular meeting of October 21st and welcome everyone. If you would like to join the council and myself in the Pledge of Allegiance, please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First part of our meeting this evening will be audience comments. This is your time to address your council. The guidelines for public participation are displayed on the overhead screen, and please limit your comments to 5 minutes. There is a sign-up list, so those that signed up first will be called first, but if you did not sign up, I will call for other speakers before closing this portion of the meeting. And if you are here speaking for a group, please identify the group that you're here for. And if you are in the audience this evening and you're hearing testimony or comments that you want to support, please raise your hand so the council has an awareness of your support for that particular comment or topic. There's also going to be 2 public hearings tonight, one on AB 7757, the 2020 levy and revenue sources, and a second hearing on AB 7758, proposed 2020 budget, including salary ordinance. So if you'd like to make comments on those topics, you could hold them for an opportunity later in the meeting when I open those public hearings. Tisha, has anyone signed up to speak this evening?
Yes, Nathan Boster.
Come on up, Nathan.
Hello, everybody. How you doing? Thank you very much for your time. I'm actually not going to be here for the hearing part of the meeting, but I just want to come
Get you to give your name.
Oh,
and
yes.
address.
I'm actually very excited for this part. I just moved, and I'm at Nathan Bosler, residing at 960 Northwest Inniswood Place here in Issaquah, Washington. I'm here to talk to council about the budgetary issues that we face in the $5.2 million deficit that's we're all aware of. As a business owner myself, I take this stuff very seriously, and I know all of you as well take that very, very seriously. So I'm here to just talk a little bit about some of the issues and some of the things that we might be able to do to sharpen our pencils, look very detailed, and what we can do to suspend, pause, eliminate, to fill that deficit. It's a big gap, and I know it's very, very serious. Myself and my wife both live and love Issaquah. I run my company here in Issaquah, and there's no other place that I would ever consider living. So I'm very committed to my community. So this is a very serious topic to me as well. A few things that I think about when I first think about budgetary cuts is, are we making the smartest decisions on land acquisition? I know that's a very expensive thing to do, and I don't know if it's the right time. Especially, as you all know, timing is very critical, very important, especially as we face this timing with the council going to be shifting. So I'm here to urge you to just consider all of our options, sharpen our pencils, look at the very detail-oriented things for budgetary issues, and what can be cut and what can be eliminated. I was out walking just a couple months ago with my wife and my dog and noticed that the Confluence Park was being redone. And I was kind of concerned because, as a business owner, I kind of think of everything like, geez, that's a lot of money. How much does that cost? How much are we spending? Some of that sort of stuff. And not only just that the cost of the land to improve, in which I felt the park was in terrific condition as is, but also the reason for improvement with the irrigation. Also, as I was notified in our council board chamber board meeting, that we also face a very serious issue for water shortage, and for the reason of the Confluence Park being improved for the irrigation system. So that's what I was told, and so with that, I just kind of started thinking, is it the most appropriate time to do that? Obviously, I always think about the greater good of people who live in Issaquah and our community, and obviously, sitting where you sit, your tough decisions have to be made, and sometimes you're complimented, praised, and sometimes you're not. As a business owner, I totally, completely understand that. Having to make tough decisions myself, you guys are on a completely higher level than that, with a lot more eyeballs on you as well. So I know it's very challenging, but I definitely wanted to just stress really, really examining if the money's being spent wisely. Looking at all options, perhaps like the land that we already have here in Issaquah, what we can do with that land to kind of recoup and close that gap and close that deficit. Obviously, people are the most important things in our community. They make up our community. This is all about people here in Issaquah, another reason why I live and work here and have my company here in Issaquah. So with that, people come first, but we need to make the decisions of timing and make sure that the timing is right and that, we count every dollar and we take it very seriously because, as we all know, the money makes the world go around. And with city government, it's very important that it's spent wisely. So I'm just here to encourage you to please just use your budgetary magnifying glasses and look at what can be spent, what can be eliminated, pause to spend it, as I said again. And I'm not going to take any more time. I just wanted to thank you for allowing me to come up here and speak my mind on behalf of the business community and on behalf of the Issaquah people. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Nathan. Has anyone else signed up to speak this evening?
No.
Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to come up and address the council this evening? Second call. Anyone wishing to come up and address council? I'll do a third call. Anyone? Okay, seeing no one else, we'll close this portion of our meeting. And thank you, Nathan, for coming, sharing your ideas on our fiscal challenge. The next item will be committee and regional reports, and let's start with Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. No report at this time.
Thank you. Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. I have two reports. The first is that the Cascade Water Alliance Resource Management Committee met on October 10th. We discussed a Lake Taps model as well as a Lake Taps water quality monitoring program. So Lake Taps is the reservoir for Cascade Water Alliance, and there's ongoing water quality monitoring as a part of that. And then we also discussed a septic survey follow-up with Pierce County. This also affects the water quality of the Lake Taps Reservoir, and I thought it is relevant to us as well because we have a number of neighborhoods and homeowners in Issaquah that are on septic. And the messages out of that work for homeowners are, first of all, that inspection is required by the state. It is a benefit to the homeowner, and the homeowner can avoid repairs in the future by doing inspections. Also, there's a difference between pumping and inspection, and just because it looks okay doesn't mean that it's actually treating sewage properly. So there is an importance to that inspection, and also that there's a link between water quality and septic systems that are functioning properly. The Cascade Water Alliance Board will meet on October 23rd, which is later this week. And I am the alternate. I will serve as the alternate for Mayor Pauley at that meeting. And I wanted to update the council. At the last regular meeting, at good of the order, I had discussed that we would be requesting a true-up this year instead of the regularly scheduled 2 years. And based on the advice of our administration, we'll no longer be doing that because it isn't going to affect our general budgetary challenges. So after more analysis, and we've all been looking at the budget more, we won't be requesting that 2-year exception to the 2-year true-up. And if you have any questions, please ask me at good of the order or after the meeting. I also have a report from King Conservation District Advisory Committee. This met on October 16th, and we reviewed and approved the King Conservation District Urban Forest Initiative Work Group's recommendation regarding urban forest stewardship projects and technical assistance. And as part of this, they discussed Firewise and whether or not there would be programs around that. And it seems that that program is currently, the future of that program is currently in jeopardy. They don't yet know if they're going to be continuing that or sort of providing some of that services within urban forestry. But the request for increased funding that they had planned on making earlier this year, they did not proceed with because there were a number of outstanding questions. And so that program, I wasn't able to get a clear response, but I know that Firewise and wildfire preparedness is very important to our community. So I'll continue to be making sure that we're up to date on that, as well as reflecting as a member of the advisory committee that that's of great importance to our community. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hunt. Councilmember Ray?
No report this evening.
Thank you. Councilmember Winterstein?
The next meeting of the Growth Management Policy Board is Thursday, November 7th, so I have nothing to report until after then.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Eastside Fire and Rescue Board of Directors met on October 10th, and there are 3 items that were of interest to report out to the community. The one is that with approval of the King County EMS levy in November, Eastside Fire and Rescue will receive approximately $340,000 annually for a program that they would be implementing called the Mobile Integrated Healthcare Program. And that's a program that aims to deliver higher quality and more cost-effective care, by coordinating resources among emergency responders and local agencies. And so some of the local agencies that Eastside Fire would be looking to partner with would be Swedish and senior centers, local nonprofits, including the Food and Clothing Bank, Snoqualmie Valley Hospital, adult daycare facilities, and others, school district, the Snoqualmie Tribe community. And essentially that Eastside fire responders would be trained to respond to emergencies in the community that may not necessarily be fire and medical emergencies, and they could be, for lack of a better word, sort of liaisons for people in the community who need different types of resources. And so Eastside Fire is really excited to be able to start that program, and I thought the community would be interested to know that they hope to start that program and look at their opportunities very soon. Secondly, the statistics for cardiac arrest are out for 2018, and Eastside Fire and Rescue reported that they had a, it's called a survival rate, but it's a discharge from hospital rate, is more accurate description, higher than the overall King County rate. Overall King County was 56%, and Eastside Fire 83%. Now that's just 1 year, but Eastside Fire and Rescue, of course, was happy with that statistic by comparison. And then the third item to report out is that the city will be saving in 2020 on its contribution to Eastside Fire. Its contribution next year will be $348,000 less. So that's the good news. And not that this is bad news, but just to close the loop, it's already reflected in the budget, so that doesn't help us close our gap any further. But it's 5.2 potentially instead of 5.5 something. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Deputy Council President Batiste.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No report this evening.
Thank you, Council President Martz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No report this evening.
It is a fast evening. We'll move to the mayor's report, which is really short. It says there is no executive session this evening. So just in keeping in line with everything that you all were doing. So we'll head to the consent calendar. The consent calendar was distributed to council in advance. If authorized, the items on the consent calendar will be considered together and approved by one motion. Have the payables and payroll been reviewed?
Yes.
They have.
Thank you. Does any council member desire to remove any item from the consent calendar and consider it under regular business? Is there a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move we adopt the consent calendar as listed in tonight's meeting agenda.
Second?
Thanks. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That carries unanimously. Next on our agenda this evening is a series of public hearings. Before we get to the public hearings, I wanted to provide some supplemental budget information for the council this evening on some possible revenue strategies that can be discussed by our council at their first truly deliberative budget session, which is coming this Wednesday night. So in an email sent out earlier today, I have provided the memo to council, and also we've had it placed with our agenda this evening. So if folks are watching at home, the memo is also attached to the package. This supplemental information is intended to guide the first phase of council budget deliberations by providing alternative revenue strategies for consideration at this Wednesday, October 23rd's council budget study session. As you know, revenue increases are a key component in my proposal for closing the forecasted $5.2 million general fund shortfall in 2020. It's critical that as council deliberates the proposed budget beginning on October 23rd, that it comes to consensus on whether it supports the revenue increases as proposed as a first step in its deliberative process, and prior to the beginning of the second phase of deliberations, where council discusses additional expenditures or proposed reductions in expenditures to better align the proposed budget with the council priorities. There is no action requested of council this evening at council meeting. However, there has been time allotted for clarifying questions. We'll get through those questions. We will take those questions this evening, and if they can be answered, great. Otherwise, we'll bring the answers to Wednesday night. But you're also encouraged to continue submitting questions up through Wednesday so that staff can prepare answers for you. In past budget deliberations, council's included revenue policy discussions as a regular part of budget study sessions. Due to the number of revenue policy questions embedded in this year's proposed budget, a first phase of deliberations solely focused on revenues is being recommended so that council can generally agree on a baseline revenue strategy to inform the remaining deliberations on the expenditure side. Which you'll see in the memo is a series of tables. The first table presents those revenue increases that were proposed in my original budget. But we've also provided some scenarios that provide lesser utility increases, utility tax increases, and also a scenario of no tax increases at all. The hope here is that these tables can show you the magnitude of impact depending on which scenario, revenue strategy the council chooses to go with. Have also heard that there has been council concern over the cumulative impact of rate increases and/or tax increases. The tables that follow, the first table on page 2, is the Water Utility Fund, and it shows the expected rate revenues in 2019, and then the next column over would be the mayor's proposed budget, followed by an alternative, which is a rate increase that is the rate increase proposed before the addition of the water treatment plant. And it shows the difference between those different scenarios. I've also heard that council is interested in understanding on a ratepayer basis what might somebody see on their bill. So there are a couple additional tables that show impacts on monthly bills and total utility rates. I recognize that the decisions to increase tax rates are difficult. I did not take this decision lightly when developing my proposed budget. Our resources have not kept pace with demand. I see raising revenues as an important variable to ensure that we can continue to provide high-quality services to Issaquah residents. But I also recognize that there are impacts to our taxpayers that council needs to consider all options as it deliberates the budget. So my staff stands ready to respond to questions and help refine the options as councils begin their deliberations on Wednesday. And I have heard from a few council members that there are already some clarifying questions. So at this point in time, if there are any questions on the memo, we can have our finance director, Beth Goldberg, come up and address them, or at least catalog them so that we can have some answers for you on Wednesday night. Questions? Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you. On page 3, there are 3 tables, and the middle table and the bottom table have the labels in the columns on the left are different, and I want to make sure I understand. The first one, that the bi-monthly billing table, on the left it says, one row says water rates, and one row says water utility taxes, and then water total cost. And then in the last table, it says total utility rates, total utility taxes, and total bi-monthly cost of the 3 utilities. And so I wanted to understand what was included in water rates, water utility taxes, and then total utility. I just didn't quite understand what was all included.
Yes, so the table at the top of page 3 is just showing the impacts for the water utility itself. Whereas the table at the bottom of page 3 includes the impacts not just for the water utility, but also sewer and stormwater. You might recall that, well, we split it up for two reasons. First of all, the council is currently contemplating changes to the water rates for 2020, so we wanted to isolate that out. And then the related utility taxes along with that. And for the water utility, you might recall that right now we have a utility tax on the water utility of 2.33%. The proposed budget contemplates increasing that to 6%. On the other city-run utilities, sewer and stormwater, there are no utility rate increases proposed for 2020 beyond what's been already adopted. And there is in place now no utility tax on those utilities. The 2020 proposed budget proposes raising those utility taxes from the current 0 to 6% so that there's uniformity across all of the utilities, city-run utilities, and frankly, all the utilities beyond that. So that's the difference between the two tables.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councilmember Ray, then Councilmember Walsh.
Yeah, this isn't really necessarily related to the memo, but thank you for the memo. There are water rate increases that are scheduled for 2020 independent of the water treatment plant.
Correct, yes.
What are the already approved increases in, do we know that?
Yes, so as of now, there is a council-adopted 3.5% increase on the water utility scheduled to go into effect January 1st, 2020. What is before the council now would be to increase that 3.5% to 9%, another 5.5% for the water treatment plant. So that's what the council is currently deliberating.
Great, that's what I was thinking. The revenue projections are based on the 9% rate increase in 2020.
Correct, for balancing the general fund budget. Well, for balancing the water fund and the general fund budget, both assume.
It's based on the higher baseline.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Walsh.
My question has been answered.
Thank you. Other clarifying questions? And this would not be the end because you've just received this material today and have to digest it before Wednesday. Councilmember Winterstein.
It's actually supplemental information, and maybe we already have it in our materials, but what are the number of water utility customers between residential and commercial that we have in the city?
I will have to get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, thank you. We will now move on to the public hearing portion of our meeting. So this public hearing for AB 7757, the 2020 levy and revenue sources, was set by council at the October 7th, 2019 council meeting. Tonight, there will be a brief staff presentation and an opportunity for council questions, followed by the public hearing. And we'll keep Director Goldberg up there.
Thank you, council members. This is the first of two public hearings this evening, and the first one is going to cover property tax and other revenues. RCW 8455 requires all jurisdictions levying property tax to hold a public hearing on revenue sources before adopting said rates. So tonight is the public hearing. Only one public hearing is required, although council can choose to keep this public hearing open if it decides. The schedule has it so that we will be coming back to you on November 4th for the adoption of the property tax levy. This is what will set the property tax levy rates for residents for 2020 and then set the course for the amount of revenues that we can expect to receive from property tax for 2020. In terms of other revenues, as the mayor just spoke of, there are other revenue proposals in the budget this year, including the utility tax and some parks fees are the notable ones. We are planning on introducing the legislation that would allow the council to deliberate and act those changes on November 4th, and then council adoption of those ordinances would be slated for November 18th. So just want to give you a little bit of an overview, and you have seen this slide before, of our general fund revenue picture. Property tax, which is the main focus of the public hearing this evening, represents about 19% of general fund revenues. And this slide depicts those revenues at $9.4 million. You might recall, although we've been inundating you with a ton of information of late, so I'll say this verbally as well. You might recall in the agenda bill accompanying the property tax that we have received revised property tax information from the King County Assessor's Office, namely new construction data. The new construction outlook has improved, and that is boosting the revenue potential from property tax by $111,000. So this $9.4 million would be more like $9.5, $9.6 million. So that's the overall revenue picture, and then the other slices of this we've talked about before, with sales tax, for example, being the single largest revenue source for the city's general fund. As we have discussed before, and again, I'll repeat here again, just knowing the volume of information we've been presenting to all of you, the 2020 proposed budget recommends levying the 1% increase on property tax, capturing the value of new construction, and capturing the banked capacity. What you saw and what we have talked about previously are the numbers that are reflected in the middle column on the chart being projected here, and that's the $9.4 million. Again, based on the revised information we received from the King County Assessor's Office, that forecast is now at 9.5, nearly $9.6 million. I also maybe should pause here to say it is not changes and updates to the forecast from King County are very common throughout the process, and it is likely we will continue to get more updates through the end. I've been joking with staff that I've been doing budgeting since 1996, and there's a person at the King County Assessor's Office that every jurisdiction in King County is waiting for data from. Her name is Hazel, waiting for Hazel. So it's like, have we heard from Hazel? Have we heard from Hazel? So we got an update from Hazel in a couple weeks ago, last week. The picture is improved, and as we get closer to November 4th, I will also be saying, have we heard from Hazel? Have we heard from Hazel? So, and Hazel is retiring, so this will be the last year you will hear me say, have we heard from Hazel? So anyway, that I just want to underscore that this is a normal part of the process, that these numbers will fluctuate. So one of the questions that came up, I believe it was the October 7th and 8th presentations, was around banked capacity and why the value of banked capacity, and maybe before I go back, why the value of banked capacity was being shown at $138,000, which seemed low relative to the 5 years that the city forwent the 1% increase in property tax. And that number has been revised a little bit, and I'll explain that in a moment. But the idea of this slide is to explain how that happened. And calculating property tax in Washington State is not the most straightforward of exercises. And in doing some research about what happened, it appears as if the city was forgetting to take one key step in the annual property tax calculation that resulted in the city unknowingly tapping into banked capacity each year, such that that value eroded. And what I'm hoping to do with this slide, and hoping to make this a simple presentation of a complex task, is to explain how that happened. And so what you do when you're calculating property tax each year is you take the previous year's levy. So in this case, I'm using 2019. So the previous year's levy would be the 2018 levy. That was at $8.8 million. It included a re-levying of refunds from the current year of $13,000. Because that's a re-levy, it's actually, there's a little bit of a double count going on in there. So what you need to do at the start of the next year is back out those refunds. In this case, $13,000. So the levy base for 2019 would lower from 8.16 million to 8.02 million. If you look at the bottom half of this slide, to the numbers in red, what happened is that it appears that the city did not back out those refunds. So was levying a slightly higher rate that in effect was slowly eating into the banked capacity. In the case of 2019, we ate into the bank capacity by about $12,000. And so this next slide is intended to show how this kind of played out, or didn't kind of play out, how it did play out over the years. So if you look at 2013, you will see that banked capacity peaked at $424,000 that year. And then what you will see in the years since is that that has slowly ebbed away. And the amounts that it has ebbed away are largely tied to the amounts of those refunds. So you'll see the refunds from the previous years shown on the far, as you're looking at this, far right of what you are looking at. And then by not backing that out, it ate into the amount of banked capacity that was available, and you'll see those numbers closely aligned. They're off because of how the 1% then rolls through it. So that is the answer to the question of how the banked capacity has lowered to now $167,000. And maybe I'll pause there in case there are questions.
I think we have some questions. Councilmember Winterstein?
Thank you, Beth. I heard everything I needed to hear when you said we had not taken that calculation into account. That's why the amount, I was the one who asked the question, it just didn't seem, the amount that you were claiming for bank capacity didn't seem in line. And is it correct to say then the calculation of our levy rate was affected by not backing this number out?
It was. So it would have been a little bit higher than the 1%, and it was not, caught by, King County, when we send them the rates, they just see that we've got the capacity in there, and so that's how it got enacted. They didn't know whether it was intended to be, dipping into the bank capacity or not, but that is the effect of what had happened. So it's not that the city lost that capacity. In fact, we've been utilizing it each year since. It was just being done not, unbeknownst to the city when we were enacting those.
Councilmember Walsh?
Could you take a moment just for the community to talk about the difference between the banked capacity and 1% and why we might not have taken it in the past but are potentially choosing to do so now?
Yes, so in Washington State, property tax can grow at 1% plus new construction each year. And that is at a rate that is far less than the rate at which costs are increasing. So you often hear people talking about structural deficits. It's tied to the cap on property tax. So a jurisdiction, a county, a city can choose to levy the 1% plus new construction. The new construction is basically automatic. The 1%'s the decision point. The way the property tax law is written in Washington State, it allows jurisdictions to say, this year we're not going to levy the 1%. For whatever reason. Jurisdictions have different reasons to not levy the 1%. But there is a provision that says, okay, if you forego that 1%, you can bank the capacity and come back and use that later. So between 2000 2009 and 2013, the city decided to not take the 1% and to bank that capacity. And we are recommending, given our budget challenges now, we are recommending now taking what is left of that banked capacity and applying that to the budget to partially offset the budget shortfall.
I am so sorry. Oh, my goodness.
So just as a follow-up, then for the taxpayer, if they had a home in 2009 to 2013 and still have it through today, then they did not see a 1% increase on their property taxes between 2009 and 2013, except for this adjustment that wasn't supposed to happen.
Yes and no. I wish it were quite that clean to explain it. So the 1% isn't a 1% on what an individual was paying. The 1% is applied to what was collected in that prior year. And so in those years, 2009 to 2013, the city chose not to grow the property tax. You know, if you were collecting $100 in 2008, it would have grown to $101 in 2009 if you levied that 1%. The city forewent that. I don't even know what that foregone in past tense, but anyway, did not exercise that option, so it stayed at the $100. But as you will see, and I've got a slide, I believe, in here, the rates that our taxpayers are paying have actually gone down because what we're collecting is going up, but assessed value on homes have been going up that much more. So the rate that our taxpayers are paying is actually lower on the value of per $1,000 value of their home.
Any other questions before we have Beth move on? You'll still have an opportunity for questions. Thanks, Beth. You want to? Oh, Councilmember Goodman?
It's not so much, it's kind of a question. It's
We'll try it out.
well, I was asking Paul here. I don't ever recall, I've been up here since 2011, and I don't ever recall during budget or any other time hearing the term banked capacity. And so, I mean, Beth won't know the answer because she wasn't here. It's just more a sort of a question, comment from council members who've been here all this time, who, I don't know, think I'm wrong. Maybe my memory's bad, but this is the first time I've ever heard. It's just more of a comment. First time I've ever heard about banked capacity was in this budget season.
Councilmember Winterstein.
Thank you, and I also don't have a question. I just do want to acknowledge, Beth, this is not the first time you've stood at that podium, and had no choice but to be very transparent about what has happened in the past and to explain our circumstances today. And I hope the public appreciates as much as I do with how much you come forward with this information, I think with disarming candor, so I appreciate that transparency.
Nice compliment. You want to continue with the presentation?
I can, yes. And actually, this is a good segue from Councilmember Walsh's question in terms of the rate impacts or how this is going to impact Issaquah taxpayers. So capturing banked capacity would add roughly $12 per year to the average annual Issaquah property tax bill. And in terms of overall impact, the estimated property tax bill for the average Issaquah homeowner for 2020 would be $697, which is up from $646 in 2019. Now, what people are actually paying in property tax is far greater than the $696 that or $697 that I'm speaking of here, and that is because property taxes are also going to King County, to the school district, to some other special taxing districts. So people's property tax bills are much higher than this, but we're focusing on the Issaquah portion because that is the portion upon which you are making some decisions or will be making some decisions. In terms of the rates, this table depicts what I was trying to explain, maybe not so artfully a moment ago, about how the levy rate per $1,000, so it's per thousand of assessed value, has actually been going down since 2011. And that is because the median house value has been going up. So while the amount that people are paying to the city has gone up over this period of time, the rate that they are paying has actually declined over this period. There have also been some questions about new construction, and so I wanted to take a moment and describe the impact of new construction on the budget. And this was a little bit more pronounced before we heard from Hazel last week, when we had received some preliminary data that showed that our the value of new construction was $67,000, I think. It is now reported at 67 million. It is now reported at $213 million, which, while lower than the new construction values in recent years, still remains fairly strong, particularly when you compare it to 2014 and 2015. What we cannot answer is how much of this is related to volume of new construction versus how much of this is related to the growth in assessed value. Can't tease that out, but the overall the value of new construction does remain strong at $213 million. It does mean, though, that the amount of property tax increase we are getting from that in the 2020 budget is less, both because the value of the assessed value of new construction is lower than 2019, but also you will see here how that rate plays out. And so the rate is decreasing, and so the amount of revenue that we are deriving from new construction is about $169,000 as opposed to $217,000 last year.
Any questions, or should we have Beth keep going?
And then just to wrap up, I believe this is the last slide before we'll open up the public hearing. The proposed budget is also contemplating other revenue changes, including utility tax rate increases and some increases in select parks fees. And we will be introducing legislation for these pieces on November 4th. And of course, the council will continue its deliberations on these proposals.
Thank you, Beth. Before I let you sit down, are there any more questions for Beth before we go to the public hearing? No questions. Thank you, Beth. The guidelines for citizen comments also apply to those that are made under the public hearing. So as a reminder, if you are here as part of a group and wish to speak tonight, please identify the group that you're speaking for as well. And if you are here this evening and support the comments you hear, please raise your hand so council can see that. I will now open the public hearing at 7:42. And has anyone signed up to speak this evening?
No.
Is there anyone who would like to speak this evening to council? First call. Kathy, come on up.
Good evening, Kathy McCory with the Greater Issaquah Chamber of Commerce. First, we'd like to start by thanking all of you for your due diligence and thanking the mayor's office for making some tough decisions and putting forth some great solutions. We would like to just give a little bit of extra information that as you go through the deliberation process, if other potential revenue ideas might come up, we'd just like to make you aware of some of the following. Our fiscal year starts April 1st. And we have noted that during the first 5 months of this year, we have lost just as many businesses in Issaquah to closing or relocating as all of last year. So just food for thought, we are experiencing a little bit of a slowdown right now. 2, taxpayers only have so much appetite for increased taxes. And so please just keep in mind our appetite moving forward, because we know we have a transportation benefit district we're looking forward to forming, and we've got some tax concerns there. And we just want to make sure that that's in your mind and you're thinking of those coming up in the future as you are with our water treatment plant and those increases. And then just remember, too, that even though we expect the world from all of you and we want everything we want, we do also realize that your role in our lives is to provide us with basic services of fire, police, and infrastructure. And we thank you for all of you, the hard work you're doing for not just the business community, but for all of us.
Thank you, Kathy. Is there anyone else who would like to speak this evening? Second call. Anyone wishing to address council? And third and final call. No one else. Okay, so council, you have a couple of options here. You can entertain closing the public hearing. This is required by state law to have it this evening. And so you can close it, but you can also continue it. So I kind of would like to hear your thoughts before we decide on the next step. Council President Mertz?
So I think that we have envisioned having a further conversation this week about some of the options and flavors if the council wanted to look in a substantially different direction on revenue and potentially expenditures this year. Because of the magnitude of the options that are in front of us, I would like to have that conversation and then potentially continue the hearing to more formally get community feedback in addition to the natural feedback that we would get. So I would be inclined to continue the hearing, but would also like to hear how my fellow council members feel about it.
Thoughts? Councilmember Goodman?
I would agree with continuing the hearing. We still have some substantive deliberations to occur, and to the extent that the community might have feedback for us, I'd like to hear it.
Thanks. Any other thoughts? Right. Deputy Council Member Batiste, Deputy Council President Batiste.
I would agree. I think continuing the hearing makes sense. We do have some things coming up and would like to have the opportunity to hear from the community in regard to those.
Councilmember Winterstein?
+1.
Okay, if there's general consensus to do that, feel free to make a motion to continue the hearing. And do we have some motion language in here for them? Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion to continue the public hearing to the November 4th, 2019 council meeting?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second?
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any council discussion? Councilmember Walsh.
I just have a question. When would this be coming back then?
November 4th.
Okay, so the public hearing would remain open until the November 4th. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any further discussion or questions or clarifications? Councilmember Winterstein?
I just want to add to the body of knowledge that everybody is working with, and there's been a couple of good questions, and I know this is a confusing thing, but I just have some simple calculations I want to share with everybody, going back to the year 2013, and using a single property, my own. My assessed value in that time frame has gone up 92.3%, which is pretty typical for Issaquah. My total in, and that's actually through next year, through next year's assessed value, which I already have. And using the rates that are being proposed, my total tax bill will have gone up 24.5% in that same time. So what we collect from homeowners does not track one-to-one with the value of their home because our levy rate goes down. And that's because we can't collect more than 1% more unless we're taking part of bank capacity, I just learned tonight. I know that is confusing, but so I've had a 24.5% increase in property tax while my assessed value has gone up 92.3. Just other numbers for people to keep in mind.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of continuing the public hearing to the November 4th, 2019 council meeting signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries unanimously. Next item on the agenda this evening is AB 7758, Proposed 2020 Budget, including Salary Ordinance, and we will be conducting a preliminary public hearing this evening. And tonight, a public hearing on the preliminary 2020 budget will be conducted. There will be a brief presentation and an opportunity for council questions and the public hearing. And Director Goldberg, it might help to explain to the council as well why this hearing is structured a little differently and why this hearing could actually be closed this evening after public comment.
Yes, and maybe before doing that, I realized I forgot to mention one thing in the property tax portion, and that is when setting the rates for next year, we are also taking into account a refunding or a refinancing of 2009 bond series that is currently outstanding. The interest rates are favorable enough that we are eligible to do a refunding in December, and we'll be coming back to you with an ordinance on November 4th that would allow us, a bond ordinance, to do that refunding, and it would save about $166,000 in debt service costs between now and 2029. So that is factored in to the rates. Unfortunately, it's a very small impact, but where we can, we are trying to capture savings for Issaquah ratepayers. So with that, then I'll go back to the budget. This public hearing, as the mayor indicated, is a little bit different than the public hearing related to the revenues. And that is because there are different state laws governing these public hearings. So RCW 35A33 requires cities to hold 2 public hearings as opposed to 1 on the revenues prior to adopting the budget. So tonight's public hearing is the preliminary public hearing on the proposed budget, and then on November 18th, there will be a final public hearing, which will be on the proposed budget plus any amendments that you will be contemplating between now and then. So tonight's public hearing can be closed, and there will be another opportunity to have a public hearing on the budget on November 18th. Remind you of our calendar. We have been through 3 sessions with all of you, or 4 sessions actually, if you count this October 7th and 8th. We're now here at the public hearing. We are coming back on Wednesday for council to begin their deliberations, and then we'll continue the march on to November 18th. I want to just remind you that the 2020 proposed budget for all funds, not just the general fund, all funds, totals $148.2 million, of which $50.2 million is the general fund, and $42 million are the enterprise funds, the utilities, water, sewer, and stormwater. The general fund is $50.2 million, and as we discussed a week or 2 ago, a majority of this is, or the largest chunk of this is for public safety functions, fire, police, and municipal court. In terms of the general fund itself, I did want to highlight the issue of fund balance. The city does have a fund balance policy that says fund balance should be 15% to 20% of total expenditures, and this budget does allow us to continue to meet and exceed that fund balance target. $13.7 million of fund balance, that represents 27.3% of expenditures. And fund balance is important for a couple of reasons. First of all, it provides the city with protection if there are unexpected emergencies, whether that is a natural disaster or a sudden economic contraction that we need to respond to. It gives us time to do that. It also is an important signal to the banks when we're selling bonds of our financial wherewithal and financial health. They are looking to our fund balance numbers for those reasons. So in that respect, fund balance is an important variable as we're looking at the budget. As we have discussed, the general fund budget does close a $5.2 million shortfall, primarily resulting from weakness in general fund revenues. We are closing this gap through a combination of expenditure and reductions and revenue increases. We've talked earlier tonight about the revenue increases. As a reminder, on the expenditure side, we're doing a combination of belt tightening, capturing savings from salary and benefits, professional services costs, and scaling back some level of services. For example, at some of the community center hours is one area we have previously talked about. The end result of this is that the 2020 proposed budget is nearly $3 million lower than the 2019 adopted budget. We've also talked about FTE levels, and this chart is a more narrow view, but you might recall from the presentation on October 7th that FTE growth has not kept pace with population growth. That's not depicted as much in this slide as much as that FTEs are only now just recovering to the pre-Great Recession levels, and with the positions that we are recommending for not funding in 2020, our FTE levels have actually fallen then below the pre-Great Recession levels. And the savings from holding these 7 positions unfunded exceeds $1 million. So before I wrap up my comments tonight, we'll again remind you of the policy questions that we are asking the council to contemplate as it begins its deliberations about the 2020 proposed budget. You all have raised a number of other questions that we have endeavored to answer, and so just want to point you back to these policy questions as you begin your deliberative process. And with that, I can conclude my comments and can begin the public hearing.
Questions from council members before we open the public hearing? None. So if there are no questions, the guidelines for citizen comments are the same as you've seen twice before tonight. I'm going to open this public hearing at 7:55. And Tisha, has anyone signed up to speak?
No.
Is there anyone who would like to come up and address the council? Come on up.
Hello, everybody, again. Nathan Bosler, 960 Northwest Inniswood Place, Issaquah, Washington. Just want to make a quick statement. Obviously, we all know people make up community, people make up the council, people make up companies. I don't want to see people ever cut or sacrificed or lowered or lost. Good people can only come around once in a while, and I hope we can retain the great people that the city has already attracted here. So I just urge you and hope that we can find other solutions. I commend the numbers that were cranked out around that. I think that's very smart and responsible, but I hope we can find other ways as well to close that gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Is there anyone else who would like to address council this evening? Second call. Third and final call, anyone wishing to address the council? We'll close the public hearing at 7:57. So as a reminder, council is not being asked to take any action this evening. Budget deliberations will continue at budget study sessions on October 23rd, 28th, and November 6th. And a second public hearing will be held on the final budget, including council's proposed amendments, on November 18th. Council is anticipated to adopt the 2020 budget on November 18th. The next item on the agenda is regular business, AB 7852, the ITS traffic camera upgrade. This is a bid award. Did I close the hearing? I did. Double check, the hearing is closed, just so it's clear. Thank you, Council President. AB 7852, ITS traffic camera upgrade. This is a bid award and authorization for funding, and I'd like to ask Bennett Osba, Public Works Operations Streets Manager, to make a presentation. Hi, Bennett.
Good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. This agenda bill requests council authorization to award a construction contract to upgrade the existing traffic cameras mounted on intersections throughout the city. I have up here a picture of kind of the command center that we can see from our monitors. I'm going to get into how we use them, why we use them, and why they're important for us. So a little background. The traffic safety cameras are heavily utilized by city staff in the following ways. PWO uses them, Public Works Operations uses them for emergency response, for vehicle accidents, flooding, snow, earthquakes, you name it. Storm monitoring, the condition of the pavement surface during snow events. Detection coordination, when we're trying to look at how the vehicles are making it through an intersection. Traffic monitoring due to unforeseen closures. Issaquah Hobart closes, and how our traffic's being routed through town. Public Works Engineering utilizes these cameras for signal timing as well and traffic monitoring. But one of the heaviest users is the Issaquah Police Department. Dispatch uses these cameras heavily for collision review prior to officers getting on site. Traffic backups for routing officers to the site. Tracking suspects on foot or in vehicles that are running from the police. Used in a variety of ways for different reporting. Abandoned vehicles, disturbances in the right-of-way, suspicious activity, and also emergency response for flooding, snow, and the rest. Our communications department has still shots uploaded on our website of each camera every 2 minutes. It is one of the most viewed web pages on the city website. We got 5,300 views in 2018. And just today, there was an accident on Front Street, and they used it to post a still shot of the accident in their Twitter feed. These cameras need to be updated now because they're 12 years old. They run on an old software, outdated software that won't be supported either by Microsoft or by the software Chameleon that we use to view the cameras. IT also explained that if it's not being supported by Microsoft, then it's now it will become a security gap after 2020. Essentially, all the existing analog cameras, which you see majority of analog up here, the poorer images on the screen are analog, and those are the ones that we're trying to replace. Essentially, after 2020, they'll become obsolete. They'll be off. They will not run on our system anymore. So this project includes the removal of 38 existing analog traffic cameras and all their components, and installing 35 new IP cameras, which there was a map of in the agenda bill. So the background on this project in general. It was originally approved in 2017, and at that time it was proposed to be as work performed by city crews. Local governments can utilize statewide master contracts for procurement and goods and services, which in this case resulted in 35% discount on materials. They can also perform in-house traffic control, and this resulted in a low estimate for the approved budget in 17. That has been further carried forward from 17 to 18 to 19. And in 19, earlier this year, I met with the city attorney, and we talked through the project itself and decided that the thresholds in state law for the work, it exceeds the thresholds in state law for the city to perform the work in-house. And a competitive bidding process would need to occur. So basically, we proceeded to advertise the project, initiate the bidding process. We opened for bids on August 30th. 2 bids were received, and the low bid came in at $372,385. Obviously, this is a change from our approved budget amount. A few reasons for that overage are that the contractors do not get the 35% discount on equipment. Majority of the cost for this contract is equipment. Traffic control is expensive when performed in-house or performed by contractors. Added costs for mobilization and additional bonds, and 3 years of inflation in an expensive industry. The bids for this project expire 65 days after being received on November 20th. Given the widespread use of these cameras, the administration has recommended that authorizing additional funds with existing budgets in order to proceed with the project at this time. The way that we would fund that is the funding will be taken from 2 different sources. The ITS Traffic Signal System Fund balance, which is a fund intended for the needed upgrades for the ITS traffic signals, which includes the traffic cameras, and the remaining budgeted funds from the 2019 Pavement Management Program. So, I believe we have other options in the agenda bill, and would you like me to go through all of those?
I think that's fine.
All right. So
That concludes your
That concludes
presentation. I
it.
did see some quizzical looks, so I
So,
figure we have some questions.
it's not fully concluded, I guess. So
Okay.
you can see the difference in the analog and the IP. IP is the top left camera. You can see the difference in quality there. This is one from today, granted. There was raining. And that's also one from today. That's IP camera, and that's the analog camera. So you can see the difference in the quality that we're trying to get away from. And that does conclude my
Thank you, Bennett.
presentation.
I saw Councilmember Winterstein and Councilmember Ray.
I
Yes,
have
sir.
a question. But boy, if there's ever a topic that wants to make me pull my hair out, could you explain a little bit more why we can't do this in-house and have no choice but to spend a lot more money? What was the determination there?
I will lead to,
How did we get to that?
I will phone a friend.
Whenever the cost of a public works project, and I view this as a public works project, exceeds the bid limits in the state law, we are required to go out for bid and treat it as a public work. We can't break the project into segments and do it with employees unless it is below the bid limits. And it was determined that this particular project, including the cost of materials and equipment and so forth of doing this project, took it above the public bid limits.
Which is?
$116,555, something like that.
Something to talk to your state legislators about. Councilmember Ray?
So 2 questions. First is, do you have a breakdown on how much of the cost is equipment versus services versus software?
I would be able to get that to you. It is majority equipment. When I had the original budget in the contract documents, I received questions from bidders saying the cost of the equipment exceeds your contract amount in your bid. You know, the project, the estimate, the allotted budget amount.
Wow.
So, yes.
So if we do move forward with this new equipment, what new features, functions, capabilities do we get beyond what we have today?
You get a much more secure network. This is a security gap for our city. It's running on Windows 7. You also get much higher quality cameras, and higher quality picture. And you continue to be able to utilize the cameras in the ways that IPD does and PWO does to, it makes us much more efficient.
Right, I have 3 questions.
Okay.
So the third one is, how can we be creative and create value using this higher quality picture? Are there things that, and this may not be a question, this may be a go forth and look at.
Sure.
Ways that we could create more value and to use these cameras and this data feed in new and creative ways that might help us to address some of our information gaps around traffic and traffic flows.
Okay, we'll take that comment and that suggestion. More questions? Deputy Council President Batiste?
Thank you for the presentation. So the support, the Microsoft support ends at the end of 2020?
2020, yes.
Okay. And I know there was an email, and I was looking for it, but could we talk a bit about the budgeted funds that come from the pavement management program? I was just trying to find that. I believe Councilmember Walsh asked that question.
Talk to how they're being, why we have remaining, or how they're being utilized, or
There was an answer that came along with it, and I was just not able to.
Just to paraphrase, it was a concern over using funding from a project area a program area where we assume we need more funding, and a
Sure.
concern that we might be drawing down something that could be used for pavement management.
Absolutely. So our pavement management program in 2019, we put together the scope of work and the bid documents, and we received bids that were lower than the estimate. On top of that, I also put forth a pavement condition rating contract this year, and I really, there's a large variable amount that could have came in at, so I wanted to have a little buffer for that. That came in lower than expected. And then, as well as that, with Public Works Engineering and the utility capital improvement projects they were doing, we coordinated and we maximized our impact, basically. And while they were replacing a water line, they were helping fund half of basically they're required to do a 2-inch overlay after they do their water line. And instead of them paving half the road, we coordinated, and we got a full road paved, and they paid for half the work. So in an effort to try to maximize the dollar in the smaller fund that we have, basically we have savings. And it's not a balance that's carried forward to the next year, unfortunately. It goes right back to the corresponding funding source, either REIT or general fund. So
Okay,
at the end of the year, it's back to the other funding sources.
Okay, thank you.
It's gone from Bennett, but you still have it, so. Councilmember Walsh.
So to follow on that idea, my concern is this concept of using pavement management for this. So it sounds almost like, while these funds are in the pavement management fund right now, we could really count them as REIT funds, because that's where they're going to go if we didn't use them. So from my mindset, I'm not taking something from pavement management.
Right.
I'm really taking something from REIT.
Correct.
So then my secondary question is, if we had optimized a whole bunch of stuff in pavement management, why don't we just do more pavement management during the year? Is it a sense of not having enough man-hours, even though you've got savings, or what?
No.
Is it?
Essentially, it's a not to exceed fund, right? $900,000 is our funding for PMP. As I put out a project, I have to scope out the work, and there are variables in that work, whether there's soft subgrade or we have to do more patching or something like that, so I have to have that buffer. If there's a year without any issues, then yes, I'm going to be coming in lower, and I can change order work into that contract, and we can continue to utilize those funds throughout the year. I can't, however, pave a third of a roadway or 200 feet of a roadway to maximize that last 50 grand. I need a much clearer scope for the contractors to get clear bids. And if the money was to be carried over, then we would have more flexibility in being able to utilize all of the funding in the next year. But that is not currently the case the second.
So to follow up on that, why are those funds, why is this not a sinking fund? Why is the money going back to REIT?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, it's a policy decision of the council. I think it really is not a fund, it's an account. And so the money is managed through the account for the balance of the year. If the council wished to say that you were going to make a deposit into a fund and give more flexibility so the money didn't have to be spent, that's something you could do, but that's not been the past practice.
Do you have anything to add, Beth?
Yes, it is. It's an account. It's like an expenditure, and the REIT is the revenue source. So, as City Administrator Bob Kowitz said, the council could decide to set up a fund if it wanted to. With a funding source like REIT that is highly volatile, I will say that does make me, the finance director, a little bit nervous, just because of the volatility of REIT. And we've talked previously about how the pavement management program, while a capital investment, is an ongoing need. It's not like, you build a new building or you install playground equipment in, your one and done kind of thing. This is an ongoing need, and we've got REIT, a volatile revenue source, tied to that ongoing need. So that makes me a little bit nervous, but that's not my decision. That's a council decision.
Director Goldberg, could you also expand on one of the approaches you had mentioned to council earlier about the TBD, and that the TBD could be a source of revenue that I think Councilmember Walsh is looking towards creating?
Yes, so we had talked, this is going back to our conversations back in May, and it corresponded actually with, I think, same night that of the pavement management program. There are more needs, more pavement management needs than we do have revenue sources. So what we have contemplated for the Transportation Benefit District is to name a series of projects, capital projects, that those revenues would support, and that revenues that we collect beyond what is needed to pay debt service on those costs would be dedicated to the pavement management program. So that is a future funding source that could be available to the city if the city does put the Transportation Benefit District measure on the ballot and the voters of Issaquah approve that measure.
Councilmember Winterstein, did you have an additional question?
I do, a couple. First comment, earlier I said this is the kind of thing that makes me want to pull my hair out about we are forced to go spend some more money. But the other end of the spectrum, I'm very grateful for you, Bennett, for as you described how you've planned and executed this program and got for the citizens of Issaquah a pavement management program for a really good dollar. So I really appreciate the work that you've done and how you explained why we even have a balance left this year. So thank you very much. I have a couple questions now.
That's
so this is
fine.
going to be a test.
I'll attempt to
What does
answer.
ITS stand for?
Intelligent Traffic System.
Intelligent because it's envisioned to, with a monitor and somebody sitting at switches, the ability to make adjustments to our stoplights so that traffic can flow?
Yes, we have that capability.
Yes, and that's why we have a separate fund. We funded this, and I think there actually was, I think it was bond, I don't remember the original, how we put this together, maybe bond related. We said we want to raise money to put in an ITS so that we can manage flow through town.
Correct.
And fascinatingly, however, in your introduction, you described uses and public benefit we're getting that go way beyond flow.
Yeah.
Right, you did. And one of them was, you talked quite a bit about public safety. You talked about police, even chasing the bad guys.
Yeah.
That was
new to
interesting
me.
on foot. But a couple of times you mentioned PWO, Public Works Operations, especially during snow events, not only for themselves, but even for residents. Like, what's it really like at the foot of Squaw Mountain? I mean, that's the time when I look at these as well. And I bring that up because it's clear that our Public Works group, who has access to other funds, benefits from this piece of infrastructure. Where my mind is, I do not want to use the balance REIT. I want to use the rest of the ITS and see if we could get the balance for this contract somewhere else. And I'm sorry we couldn't discuss this earlier. But because PWO is such a benefactor of this system, is it possible if instead of REIT, we could tap into PWO funds?
Beth, do you want to come up and take that?
You got to take that one.
You got to take that one, Beth.
I don't know that I can give you a straight answer tonight. The PWO funds are the utility funds. So the question that we would have to look at is the ability within existing rates to be able to absorb those costs. And or if it requires a rate change. So that's not something I can answer tonight. We also just will have to make sure that there is strong alignment. We can, I think, make a case for that, but that would be something we would have to investigate further.
Yeah, that certainly threatens the 65-day window. And what are other uses? You talked about public safety. Most of that comes from general fund. Some of it comes from mitigation. What are the other uses, and that you describe? I'm hunting for other sources other than REIT. I'm just be very candid with you. And unfortunately, this feels like a committee meeting. I realize that's our first chance to talk about it.
Yeah, we'll just keep playing the microphone game here.
I'll go for it.
In terms of other uses for these cameras, we've covered a pretty big swath of them, and snow response is definitely all the streets. Accident response, streets is using it. However, there are spills associated with accident response, and we do have flooding. But we can definitely get back to you on that. I don't know. I haven't even explored that in my head right now until you brought it up.
So hopefully it's clear to everybody where my head is on that. So I do appreciate the way you put the presentation together and the way it's explained. And again, I really wish we would have had more of a chance to do this before a planned action tonight.
Yep.
So my first opportunity to talk about it.
Any other questions? Council President Martz.
So around this whole ITS signal timing, what fraction of the time do we have someone monitoring and adjusting lights based on the cameras?
That is typically the responsibility of the traffic engineer, and my signal techs make the adjustments based on recommendations from the engineering department. And I would not be able to give you a clear answer on how often they are reviewing those for signal time changes.
So that's not like 8 hours a day kind of thing. We're not dynamically adjusting light timing.
Currently in the city, no, we are not doing that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilmember Goodman.
I hope I didn't miss this. Are the cameras considered a capital asset?
Yes.
Okay. And it's not in the, I'm guessing I don't think it's in the capital improvement plan, and I'm wondering if part of it is because
17.
maybe
It's
we
been
had
carried
planned.
forward each year from the CIP. It's TR 18, I believe.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Additional questions? Councilmember Ray.
I'm just trying to figure out how to get the cost down. So the biggest problem, as I see it, really isn't, I mean, I love the new high resolution, but the biggest problem really is the lack of support on Windows 7 going forward, right? And
Correct.
And the associated security vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Is there a way for us to upgrade the current equipment to use Windows 10 and the most recent version of software?
We are currently using special adapters to allow the functionality, and they basically will not work. Basically, the system becomes obsolete after next year, according to IT and the software manufacturer. So
When is this going to be implemented if we go forward?
as soon as possible.
Wait, you have a bid that is good for how long? How many days?
November 20th.
How long is it going to take to implement? I mean, from when we say go to when we say we're done? 3 months, 6 months,
well,
8 days?
The traffic control industry is very, very behind in terms of you order a streetlight pole, it says it might take up to 23 weeks. So I can't give you a firm amount of time on months before the equipment shows up, but once the equipment shows up, it would happen very quickly. I mean,
Well, so Microsoft's going to stop support for Windows 7 on the 1st of January. So we're going to have a whole, no, of 2020.
well, from what I've heard from IT, we are paying X amount of money to maintain that through 2020.
Okay.
But that's phoning a friend who's not here.
Okay,
to
no, that's
answer that
fine.
question.
I'll believe you.
Additional questions? We could also entertain a motion if you want to have a conversation, a discussion versus questions. Questions still?
Could we pursue only half of the cameras or something like that?
Yes, so that is the option, that is one of the options that was presented. There are quite a few. So we could award the contract with the existing budget, which would, I don't know exactly how that mathematically plays out, but less than half of the cameras would be, the analog cameras would be updated to IP cameras. Or we could use the existing ITS fund to its full capacity and be able to get more. I mean, it's all a number game. I can cut back the scope of the project as much as needed. However, we will lose that functionality on the intersections on that map, on whatever amount. It's all a number game.
So on that idea, if we decided, hey, we've only got money in the fund and we only want to allocate the amount this year to take care of that portion, and then maybe we want to go in a later year and add back the other cameras.
Absolutely.
I assume that would add to costs because then you would have two different contracts with.
Yes, it would be rebid with a lower quantity, that was more quantity, cheaper prices, but majority of this is an equipment purchase, and that's how I bid it, was equipment only on the cameras and the component pieces, so I could make these adjustments if we needed to make them.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions? Councilmember Wintersheim?
So if we limited the funds available to this to the ITS funds only, that would be 70,000 and change plus the 176, so that's 246. A little bit short of the bid, but we could get significant amount of work done. And if we did that, then the overall coverage in the city would be less? We would be there would be a net loss of coverage?
Yes, I mean, but we can decide which intersections we're putting them at. We can maximize the visibility of which intersection we're putting them at. We currently did that by we're taking away 38 and we're putting back 35 to try to get a little lower, but yes.
And then theoretically, if in the future we wanted to add capacity, it'd probably be below 116,000 and we could add some more cameras.
I will.
Theoretically, of course.
I don't think I should answer that.
Council President Martz.
Do we know the public traffic to the website where these cameras are located? Do we know how many hits we get from the public?
Yeah, I have a graph I can show you.
Did you not state it was 5,000 plus?
It was 5,300 last year.
You?
Additional, City Administrator Bobkowitz?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I think it really comes down to what do you want to do? We can find, I think the money is there. I think it's important to reinforce that this is not a separate restricted fund. This is a allocation in the budget. And so staff is just trying to give you a solution. And so there were those dollars that have not been allocated this year. We have put that forward. If you choose not to spend them on these cameras, that money is going to go to fund balance and will be used to help balance the budget. So there's not a mechanism in place to keep this money put aside for other pavement or transportation issues. So if you'd like to move forward with the cameras, I think it would be helpful to approve the contract moving forward. We could come back as we balance the budget in the fourth quarter with a solution to get this done. Talking to the finance director, there may be opportunity to take some, there's no stormwater money in this, for example. So since we use this to monitor storms and drainage, we probably could take a portion out of that. So I think it really comes down to, do you want to do this? I think we can finance it. If you don't, then whatever additional motion you think is appropriate.
Additional questions? Councilmember Winterstein?
Seeking clarity, first of all of the funds we're talking about would be coming from REIT, so it's not in the formula to balance the general fund for 2020. That's my understanding. Hence my, and then City Administrator Bobkowitz, did I hear you say that we could authorize this project but find all the money elsewhere later?
Well, this is a 19 project. And so we're going to have to, as I think you've heard from us over many weeks, we're going to have to go through a process to balance 19. And so if this is a part of the process to balance 19, I would ask Public Works Operations, they already don't believe they're going to spend the money on any other purposes as we sit here now toward the end of October. So that money, that REIT money will be available to help balance the budget. And so, again, for 19, not for 20, but for 19. So if you wish to move forward, you could authorize moving forward with the contract. We then can come back to you with a fourth quarter adjustment to cover the cost.
More questions? Councilmember Goodman?
I was going to make a motion if there aren't any more questions.
Okay.
I would move to award the construction contract to Titan Earthwork LLC for the amount of $372,385, including sales tax, and direct the finance director to include $70,690 from the ITS traffic signal system fund balance and $125,613 from the remaining budget of the 2019 pavement management program in a subsequent 2019 budget amendment.
For a second.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any council discussion? Councilmember Goodman?
I made the motion, and maybe there will be proposed amendments by fellow council members, which would be just fine. But I guess my general comment is, are we really thinking about going backwards in terms of traffic camera technology? And my thought is no. I can't imagine that we're just going to not, upgrade when we need to upgrade. So I appreciate City Administrator's comments about this is 2019, and we can figure out some way to balance the 2019 budget. We do have a very, very healthy fund balance. And so I am could be persuaded otherwise, but at this point, I am convinced that we need to move this project forward. And I think the threshold issue is whether we want to go ahead and upgrade the cameras. I think the second issue, if the answer is yes, is then how we do that budget-wise. That's why I made the motion.
Thanks. Councilmember Walsh, Councilmember Hunt, Council President Martz.
So on that realm, I agree with assessment number one is, yes, the cameras are very important. I think this is fantastic to get an IP system versus analog. I think it provides fantastic service for the city and our residents. My concern initially was, hey, are we paving fewer roads just because we have to put this out to bid? And so I think in the future, I'm going to want to have a conversation about how we can utilize all of our pavement management funds for paving, even if we get great bids and save money. So I guess I'm supporting this because we've gotten a good conversation about, hey, let's look at other fund options, and knowing that this will somewhat just be coming from REIT.
Thank you. Councilmember Hunt.
I'm also supporting this. I think that the argument is very clear from a public safety standpoint. The cameras are used by police officers as well as an emergency response, and that's one of our core responsibilities as a city, is to provide that public safety services. So I think the argument is very clear, as well as that it's used for communication, and it's one of the most viewed web pages on our city website. So I think for providing that transparency, it's also important. And then as to the funding mechanism, the one thing that occurs to me is we do have impact fees, and I wonder, as this is in the capital improvement plan, if it's possible also those fees, I believe sometimes they're expiring. I wonder if there's an opportunity to use those there. So as we consider what's eligible for this in terms of getting some flexibility in the budget, that would be one further question I had. But generally in support, and I think the argument for why we should have these cameras and that they be secure is clear.
Thank you. Council President Martz.
So I'm going to vote no this evening because I would like to see us remove the current system and create a new system from the ground up that would be indicative of what can be done with current technology. I find the list of ways that we use the cameras, I just don't see it. If we cared about storm monitoring, we would put cameras at either the top of Squawk Mountain or the top of the Highlands, where we would actually see where the snowfall was. If we cared about flooding, we would put cameras where the creek is so that we can see flooding at the creek. Signal timing, since I started on council 10 years ago, we've said the benefit would be integrating with the state and the county and the interchanges around exits 15 and 17. That's where the benefit would be, an automated system that would time our lights to their lights. We've been talking about it for a decade. This is yet another Band-Aid on a system. I'm glad that 5,300 people look at it, but we could be doing so much better. We don't currently take advantage of the Google traffic information that's available out there to adapt to what we're doing. I believe that the next major step that Google will take with Google Maps will be integrating webcams. So we're going to have communities are going to start having access to more cameras through some of these integrated web-based technologies. And I would like to see us come back in a couple of years or even a year and when the budget situation's a little bit better, use this opportunity to pause, reset, and come up with a system that really reflects the needs of our community. I don't think this, and I'm sorry, I just have to say, I don't see, it's just strange, it strains credulity that we can track subjects on foot with the timing of these cameras. Maybe once or twice we get lucky, but if you look at the locations of these cameras, I just don't believe that that's having an impact on public safety. So I'm going to vote no this evening.
Thank you. Deputy Council President Batiste, followed by Councilmember Ray.
So I am going to vote in favor of going forward somewhat reluctantly. I feel like we're at a place where we're right up against a really important deadline, and I wish we weren't there. I mean, the tough piece about this, while I completely agree with and understand some of the comments from Council President Martz, we need to go forward. The cameras, I feel, are important in terms of public safety, and we're running up against the Windows 7 issue, and that is going to create a security problem. So I feel like we'll need to go forward. I have a couple of comments. One is that I just don't know what we could have done, kind of looking backwards, which is never a great way to go, but to not push up against this timeline that we probably knew was coming with Microsoft no longer supporting the software. And also, if there would have been a potential option in the past, if we knew that we could do things in-house up to $116,000 or whatever that number was, to do a piece of it over a couple of years, so we weren't right up against, we've got to do all this, right now, right as the software issue is coming up. So I'm supporting this. I wish we were in a different spot, but this has to do with 2019, and I think we'll be able to find what we need.
Thank you. Councilmember Ray.
I agree with Council President Martz almost completely, except in one area. I believe that this is a Band-Aid, but I also think it's a Band-Aid we need to apply. I'm struck with a couple of other things. One is, if you look at the map, there are a couple of really grossly underserved communities in our city. The South Clove or South Lake Sammamish neighborhoods, no cameras. Newport Way, no cameras. The Tallis neighborhood, 17th/SR 900, one camera. So I think that there's an opportunity for better coverage as we move forward. I really wish that we would take advantage of these needed upgrades to not make incremental changes, but as Council President Martz, I think, is suggesting, is that we look for taking advantage of these opportunities to make significant leaps forward. This is an opportunity we should have cashed in on to start looking at next generation intelligence signaling, not doing what we're doing, but with higher resolution, because it doesn't really improve the outcome as I see it. So I can get behind supporting this contract. I just wish we had done it differently, because I think we missed an opportunity to really do something significant.
Thank you. Council member, trying to see who has talked. We are going to go to Winterstein and then Walsh.
We have 14 months. Let's take the time and look at this again and figure it out in the 14 months we have, including a possibility of a spending plan that spreads the cost across the true departments and the way we're using it. So I don't think we should go forward. I'm going to vote against this resolution, this motion, and my ask would be to go back and rethink these funding sources and take a look at the opportunity to perhaps optimize it for the uses where they are and what would be the best. Work with a budget that would actually meet the needs that we've identified perhaps better than we have right now. So I think we have time, and we should take that time. We're in a very tight time across the board, and I think this is a good example of an issue where we're not going to lose anything. They're on Windows 7 now. They get the vulnerability now. That's not going to change. That's the way it is right now. It would be through the end of next year. So let's take that time and come up with a better plan.
Councilmember Walsh, followed by Councilmember Hunt.
So these are some compelling arguments, and I think my position on that has changed as far as a concept of what could we be doing here, because this is an upgrade as far as cameras, but what is that serving for the community, and could we be taking this as a leap forward rather than a step? So, thank you.
Councilmember Hunt?
I also appreciate the counter arguments that are raised by Council President Martz. I think that I don't think we have as pressing a deadline, because we will have another regular meeting even if we wanted to proceed with the contract. Without the contract expiring, we could do this in another meeting. I think also this conversation is partly a product of that we didn't have a committee meeting. And so this conversation has sounded a lot like a large committee meeting, and that's partly a product of having recently transitioned away from committee meetings to study sessions, but this was the first touch for council on this issue, and so we've raised a bunch of questions, and in the committee structure, we would have a report back with those questions. So I, as a fan of making sure that we answer all our questions, and also since we do have the second meeting, I think we do have the opportunity, even with the current contract before it expires, to discuss this or make a decision at the next meeting. I would also be in favor. And I would just like to know all the options, both for the funding as well as for the technology, taking into account that maybe we could have a different outcome if we better understood our options.
Councilmember Goodman?
What would be the, Matt, this is probably the clerk or the city attorney, what would be, because it seems like I've heard from, again, I made the motion so we could start having some discussion. What would be the mechanism for deferring this to future meeting? Withdraw the motion and have the agenda bill come back, or what's?
You could postpone, there could be a motion to postpone this to the next regular council meeting.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, if I may. We're just trying to sort through the budgeting piece of this, because again, this is something that's budgeted in 2019. There is no budget for any of this in 2020.
Right.
And so the ITS is a fund, and so that money could be carried over as fund balance. The payment management money is not, so any money that we were picking up to help make up the difference would not be available in 2020, at least as the budget is currently configured. So perhaps it does make sense to continue the item so that we can deal with the budget issue, so that we can make sure that there's at least money available to continue the programmatic discussion, so that you don't come back then at the beginning of the year and we tell you, sorry, there's no money to do any of this, because I think that defeats the purpose of the discussion you just all had.
And I want to check in with the council on one thing as well. I heard two different things here. One was the funding sources concern, and I think that is something that if we continue, you'd be able to get an answer to. The larger question is whether or not this is the technology you want to make your investment in, or if you want to look at something else. I don't believe that's an answer that you can get at the next meeting. And so I'm not sure how you want to resolve the two of those. If it's just going to be about funding sources, continuing is a good idea. If it's scrapping and going with something new, that's going to be a longer amount of time to determine what that would be, and potentially a budget adjustment in the 2020 proposed budget to cover what that might be. So what are your thoughts on that? Councilmember Winterset.
Thank you. Take the time between now and then. My request would be to do an exercise, not only on the funding, but also get the bright minds together in one room and ask yourselves a question like, what would it take to take another look at the design and the deployment? What would be the timing? And can we still do all that? What's the possibility we could do that before the end of 2020? So I would expect someone to come back in a couple weeks and saying, here's another funding option. But if you still didn't even want to do that, like, yes, we probably have enough window between now and the end of 2020 to do something, or no, I don't think we have enough time between now and the end of 2020. That's what I would, and I would take that into consideration if we were to vote on a motion at the next business meeting.
Deputy Council President Batiste.
Well, and the one question that is not completely clear, we're talking about, we have an existing system and we're looking to upgrade it. Once it's upgraded, if we were to add some of the capabilities that we're talking about adding, do we have the potential to add on to that system? Or do we have a clear and definitive answer that, nope, that would be a completely different system? And that's a huge question for me as I'm looking at this, and I don't know if we have the answer to that tonight.
We don't.
Council President Mertz.
So for me to get to yes would require understanding a path to what I think would actually have a significant impact on the community, which is integrating, getting the ITS up to speed where we would, and I don't expect to get the ITS up to speed today or tomorrow or next week or next month, but what would be the path to getting ITS up and integrated with interchanges 15 and 17 that would have, I believe, a substantial impact, particularly exit 15 and the surrounding streets. And then the other parts is the two areas of public safety where I think cameras could be important, which is potential flooding. And this community, the weather is so altitude dependent. To not have any cameras at the top of Squawk or Talus, or for my friends in Talus, or in the Highlands, we do ourselves a huge disservice to understanding what's going on at any given time. And I say this as someone who lives 300 feet below the top of Squawk. So for me to get to yes, I would need to know in these three big areas, the ITS, emergency, down the road, how would we get to having a better handle using our system for emergencies and using it for weather response? That's what it would take for me to get to yes.
Thanks. Councilmember Ray.
Interestingly enough, the most compelling thing that I heard tonight in making this decision was that we are good on Windows 7 and security patches through the end of next year. We don't have something that is on fire. We have time to think about this and give this a more circumspect look. So I'm not concerned so much about the funding strategy, because I have great faith in our city administrator and our city finance director. They will come up with a funding strategy that makes sense. What I don't want to do is for us to make this $300,000 and some odd $1,000 investment and say, gee, I wish we had done that differently. And I think we have time to revisit that. So for me, bringing back in 2 weeks, if we're going to bring back the same solution with a different funding package, that doesn't do anything really helpful for me. What would do something to move me would be to say, look, we've got to replace our traffic cams, and we're going to take a leap forward, and we're going to next generation that I think, as Council President March said, really makes a difference for the people who live here.
Councilmember Goodman.
So what are the options for the motion then? Not sure we have the information that we'll need for November 4th.
Can I ask if we could take a 5-minute break to let the administration team talk about options, so we give you the full suite?
Yep.
Okay, so we'll take a 5-minute break.
No,
I tried to do that, but it didn't work.
So we are back from our recess, and I'm going to have City Administrator Bob Kowitz go over some suggestions for action for council.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I think what we've heard is a number of things. One is that these cameras are important. Two, that they're important now and into the future. And that the council wants to make sure that any investment we make today is an investment that will continue to serve us well into the future. And then also, what is the future? What can we do in the future to leverage existing technologies in addition to the video technology to make traffic move better in Issaquah, as well as all the other benefits that we get from these systems? So that's what we've heard you say tonight. What we would like to do is come back on November 4th, and we believe between now and then we can look at some additional budget options for the current year should the council wish to move forward with the purchase of the cameras. We can go back to members of our staff who have been working closely on this and talk about the interoperability issue. New systems that are coming online still need video feeds. We need to be able to answer the question, will these cameras serve those systems? Because the next piece of what is the future, what additional systems we want to put in place, that's a large ticket item that we are not going to be able to give you answers for as you do your 2020 budget deliberations. But my sense is that if we can come back with a better financing plan for 19 and talk a little bit about how these video feeds could be used in the future with additional investment, that hopefully that would satisfy many of your concerns. You mentioned that there are cameras on peaks that are contemplated in the midst of this. Could you share that information as well?
Yeah, we, at the end of last year, or really in February, we decided that we needed cameras at the higher elevations. We have them purchased. We have all the equipment for it, top of Squawk, Talus, Montreux, Highlands. We are working on getting power from PSC. They're going through new regulations with the small cell stuff, so we're working with trying to get power to them currently.
So that's separate from the item that's before
That
the
is
council
separate
this
from this, yes.
So if the council chooses to move forward with this at a later point, those cameras that you just described are already going to be in the
Correct.
system, and they will be the digital cameras.
Correct.
You're proposing. So Madam Mayor, Council President, what would ask is that the council consider continuing this item to November 4th.
I have a question for the city clerk. We have a motion that's been moved and seconded on the table. Does that have to be dealt with, or can we have a motion just to continue to a date certain?
Someone can make a motion to postpone the motion that's pending to the November 4th council meeting. That would be the proper procedure. And then the motion, to clarify, when you come back on the 4th, this motion will be live. And so at that point, you could have an opportunity to amend it, withdraw it, vote on it as is, et cetera.
Wonderful, thanks. Councilmember Goodman?
As the maker of the motion, I would like to move that we, is it continue?
Move to postpone to November.
Postpone to November 4th, please.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. I saw a couple hands go up. No, okay. No questions about the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Any other business that we have to do with that, Tisha, or are we done? Awesome. The next item on the agenda this evening is good of the order, and do council members have anything for good of the order? I have one item, just waiting to see if anybody else does. Okay, the one item that I had was this afternoon, I was able to send out an email about the Sound Cities Association's annual appointment process, and provided some information on what Council President Martz and I were able to discuss last week on some priority seats that we would like to see City of Issaquah applying for. The spreadsheet shows you which ones are the priorities, who currently holds it or might be moving off, and a description of what that committee's scope of work is, and also date, time, location of meeting. And also a link to the full list of appointments, because I know some of you may be interested in other appointments as well. I just wanted to point that out too, that it was there. The due dates are November 6th. We're hoping to have all of the information packaged together by October 31st and sent off to SCA. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I think that was all that I had. Vicki, you did not, or Councilmember Hunt, you did not require any more, to provide any more information on the CWA tune-ups, true-ups unless requested.
Right, I just wanted to clarify if anybody had a question.
Great.
Could try to take it.
Thank you. Anything else for good of the order? Upcoming council meetings. On October 22nd, tomorrow, there is a council study session at 6:30 PM in council chambers. The agenda items are Transit-Oriented Development Project, the 2020 legislative agenda, and utility rates. On October 23rd, there is the oft-mentioned this evening budget study session at 6:30 PM, proposed 2020 budget deliberations. October 28th, another budget study session at 6:30 PM in council chambers. And on November 4th, a regular council meeting at 7 PM. Potential agenda items are, get this right, ITS traffic cameras, a regional coalition for housing ARCH update, sports combine update, interlocal agreements with respect to the PFAS study, 2020 levy and revenue sources, introduction of potential revenue sources for the 2020 budget, including utility tax, cemetery fees, and parks and recreation fees. There is no executive session this evening, so there being no further business, this meeting is adjourned at 9:06. I had